Hi, my name is Reginald Shaw, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the socio-psychological motivations of behavior, which is basically a comparison of other social psychology theories and trait theory. So let's start. Behavior is an aspect of human life that is a result of both internal and external factors. So we'll take a look at trait theory and see how their perception is said to influence behavior and communication, and compare that with what other social psychologists say influences behavior and perception and communication. So trait theory argues that the internal or genetic traits accounts mostly for a person's behavior than the environment. And the argument is that genetics can account only for a small part of what affects behavior and communication in people. The human environment has a large impact on how we communicate as we grow older, how we respond in any given social situation, and how we view ourselves and the world psychologically. And by comparing different social psychological theories, behaviors and communication patterns can be observed to have more of an influence on individuals and be the result of the variations of elemental factors in one's environment. So, the purpose of this research is to show that environmental makeup during development is very crucial to understanding what will motivate a person's future behaviors. And a couple of the questions that we'll be asking is, how does the environment influence motives and behavioral outcomes? And how does the environment influence an individual's socio-psychological makeup over time? So the first thing that we'll be doing is we'll be comparing two different theories. We'll be comparing trait theory, John Digman's aspect of trait theory, with Richard Stedman's sense of place. And sense of place basically says this: environment is an agent of the self. So comparing that with trait theory says the environment is not important when it comes to a person's behavior. Sense of place says that self weaves together nature, cognition, or social aspects. And trait theory says that what happens is biologically or genetically determined, or the situation or environment doesn't really matter as much. Sense of place says that our cognitive interpretation of the environment is in our brain, and trait theory agrees with that. It says that a way an individual experiences the world depends also on our brain. But the difference is that in sense of place, Mr. Stedman actually places attention on attachment to environment as being more so of an influence. Another theoretical comparison with trait theory is Appario and Fisk, their idea of human motivation. So in human motivation, their theory is that it focuses on motives that drive actions that are related to the environment, whereas trait theory feels that traits are important, so it focuses on different traits. And of course, trait theory, those traits are neuroticism, extroversion, openness, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. And human motivation concentrates on belonging, understanding, controlling, and trusting. So human motivation also feels that actions are performed in relation to the environment, whereas trait theory says that action or behavior is a combination of trait states and temperament. So we see some differences there in human motivation and trait theory. So also, human motivation feels that the way an individual communicates with their environment largely depends on 5 things. One is a sense of belonging to that environment and the people within it, like family networks, relationships, communities, groups, and social hierarchies. 2, one's ability to control the environment. 3, the way we communicate with our environment depends on how we understand it. 4, the ability to trust the environment and the people in it. And 5, maintaining a sense of self is derived from being in tune with one's environment. Moving further along with Ansel and his colleagues, they concentrated on feedback seeking behavior and how that influences us. So their study analyzed the reasons why people seek, select, process, and react to information that is relevant to the self throughout a variety of contexts. So the self is the point of reference for social cognition, emotion, motivation, and social behavior. And accordingly, there are 3 main motives which drive feedback seeking behavior. And these are ego-based, instrumental, and image-based motives. These are all influenced by one's environment. Another study that was also done is by Major and O'Brien, and they felt that stigmatization really affects a person's communication abilities and their behavior. So their study was stigmatization and the environment. So stigmatization, has a negative effect on the individual's thoughts, feelings, and emotions, therefore affecting the way that individual communicate with his or her environment. Trait theory says that how we experience the world and behave is in our brains and is largely biologically and genetically determined and has little to do with the situation. Another comparison is rejection in one's environment, and that examines how rejection in one's environment leads to negative communication behaviors. The study revealed that social exclusion impaired an individual's capacity to be empathetic and also impaired in any inclination to help or cooperate with others. The analysis also found that children that were from stable, cohesive families and who have other sources of adult or communal support are more likely to act in caring and pro-social ways. And exclusion affects an individual emotionally by making them indifferent in situations that require an emotional response. Lerner and his colleagues focused on group behavior in a legislative setting. Their study reveals that in a political environment in a legislative setting, individual decisions are greatly influenced by group or party stance rather than one's own preferences. And it elaborates on the hypothesis of misperception in 2 ways. One, it examines how particular social psychological processes cause misperception. And 2, it recognizes the distribution of preferences in which misperception could possibly produce majority decisions. Continuing on with the group behavior in a legislative setting, is that there are 2 basic processes of social perception. 1, there is a normal tendency to assume another's preference is more like one's own than they actually are. And 2, the normal tendency in a political setting to rely on over-exaggerated simplistic stereotypes when attributing views to others different than oneself. So these strategic behaviors can be attributed to causes that are created within the environment rather than on an individual's genetic makeup. The last researcher that we'll cover is Morella Bottineau. She examined how our social environment impacts our patterns of thought, behavior, feelings, and ideas. And within the environment, there is a dynamic relationship between several elements: activities, feelings, interaction norms, and communication. And she also researched and observed that justice cannot be done to events by trying to analyze man's feelings and behaviors in a state of isolation. Man has to be analyzed in a social context. So this means both physical and the social environment. Environment is a factor that influences communication, and this means how the physical environment is composed. That is the size of the room or space, the color, lighting, heating, etc. And these environmental elements influence our behavior in ways that we're not always aware of. One more researcher, Edward Krupot, focused on social psychology and urban behavior, and he analyzed how the urban environment impacts our attitudes, relationships, and behavior patterns. He also observed that previous psychologists sought their explanations of behavior by looking inside the person as isolated from their surroundings. And there was also a difference in caring and helping of people dwelling in an urban environment as opposed to a town or rural one. And the classification of behavioral differences among people were connected with environmental differences of setting and communities. So the results showed there was less social contact between neighbors and less help among individuals shown to strangers in cities or urban environments than in towns. So the conclusion is that it can be inferred thus far that environment is more influential in affecting communication and behavior than does genetic or biological traits. This idea is supported by observing research conducted on the various environmental elements, both physical and social, that influence behavior. The various elements which make up an individual's social and physical environments will have a lasting imprint on future behaviors. Thank you.